we really look for smart, kind, highly motivated, and also very empathetic students. If I'm based in Munich, I get to work with students from London, from Cambridge, from Madrid. And for the students, because they get to actually work on a live deal. Through Innovis, you really, in the end, learn the kind of decision process or the mindset of a VC on deal selection. And this you can leverage either as a future VC or as a future founder.
Welcome back to Metis Munich. I'm super glad to be talking today to Maximilian Eichler, who founded Innovis VC. And we're going to give you a little bit of some insights on what Innovis VC is all about, and just to kind of give you a better idea what the people behind it really are, why you started this, and it's like in the middle of the pandemic, right? So how did that decision come about for you?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I think Innovis is a very exciting opportunity for all motivated students who are interested in entrepreneurship or VC. And actually, Innovis started, or the idea of Innovis started to form in the first week of the first lockdown here in Munich. So it was really, I think after 3 or 4 days in the lockdown, I started to get a bit bored. And I believe really creativity comes from, a place of letting the mind wander a bit. This can come organically via actual boredom, as it was for me in the first lockdown, but also by design of actually, taking the time of just sitting down for 15-20 minutes and not getting distracted by input, but really just being with your thoughts. And I think for me, I had a bit of time, and I had been working at a VC fund for a few months back then, and we started to build this conviction on the idea that our ecosystem needs a student initiative for VCs, and that became stronger and stronger. So just like we have student initiatives for entrepreneurship, for consulting, for capital markets, we started to build a stronger and stronger conviction that there should also be a student initiative for VC. And then we had the time, and we started working on it. And yeah, but in the end, I don't think we were the only ones who had the idea. But I think the team that we found to execute on that idea was really exceptional, and that enables us to build a large player in that space.
That's so cool. Yeah, I think one of the things is, anyway, execution is key. I feel like that's something said in VC and a lot of times, and even for me, because it was for me like having a little bit of time off. So I definitely relate to you. So you talked a little bit about like the necessity of there being a student initiative for venture capital. Like, what is long-term your vision for it? Now, what do you hope really to achieve with it?
I think the initial vision we had for Innovis, we've already achieved quite a bit of that. So Innovis should be a place for highly motivated students to go to if they want to learn about VC in a very hands-on setting. So this is kind of the mission at our core. And I think we've already achieved that to a certain extent. And now it's about, continuing to grow that core part of what we do, and build additional offerings on top. And we really believe that the best way to learn venture capital itself is not to, listen to another lecture or do 1 or 2 case studies, but it's to actually source companies, talk to them, talk to founders, and analyze many startups over a long period of time to really build an intuition what a great startups look like in the early stages. And I think or at least I haven't really seen any other big student initiatives take an approach that's similar to that. And that's also why many of our members stay with the organization for a year or longer, because they really get this hands-on experience, and at the same time, they build these really strong relationships with the other members in the organization. And that's at the core of what we do. And I think the knowledge you gain, kind of the intuition of what a great startup looks like from VC perspective, you can either leverage as a VC yourself, or actually also as a founder when you start to fundraise. So we're a relevant learning experience for future VCs and future founders alike.
Yeah, there are so many things we're going to get into more, like about the educational offerings and like how you really get that hands-on. But I think that's a very important point also to stress, that it's not only if you want to go into venture capital, but also if you want to be a founder, actually, because there are so many terminologies or how you build a pitch deck, how do you even interact with the whole fundraising process, that I think that's really important, that it's not only for VC, but actually if you want to found as well. All right, so let's get into a little bit what you guys really offer. So the first part of it is the Analyst Academy. So as I understand it, it's a crash course. So what is kind of your aim with that? Walk me a little bit through what can people expect when doing that?
Yeah, we have the Analyst Academy in the beginning because we have members who are in very different stages of their kind of academic journey. We have a lot of also members who join, in their first or second year of their studies, of their bachelor's, and often they have a basic notion of what VC looks like or what a VC does. But with the academy, we want to make sure or to give everyone a certain foundation or baseline to start from, and that's about learning what is a VC fund actually, what are the roles in a VC fund, where does the money come from, and how do I source and evaluate startups, and also how do I build a network. And that's really a fairly short, maybe 4 or 6 weeks program to give everyone a certain foundation that they can then build on in the more hands-on part of our offering.
Awesome. So we have also the Academy Fund then, that's kind of, as I understand, the subsequent offering, which is more hands-on. So what are kind of the different pillars? I read a little bit about startup presentations, industry sessions, and due diligence. So that sounds like a very wide offering you have going on. So maybe you can talk us through that.
Yeah, exactly. So in the end, we want to be as close as possible to the day-to-day activities of an actual VC fund. So the first part of that are the weekly meetings. Every VC fund has their weekly deal flow call, where they, on the one hand, usually discuss some operational updates, going to events, stuff like that. But they also discuss the startups they're currently evaluating or have sourced. And we have something very similar, where in our weekly meeting we have an initial update on the organization and what we're working on. But we also discuss the startups we've sourced over the past week. Then we kind of also discuss and challenge them. And from these discussions, the best startups that emerge are forwarded to our VC partners through a platform we built internally that's called our lead engine, where essentially we have a more or less one-page summary of the most interesting startups we found. And on the other hand, the VCs can access this information. So that's part one, kind of sourcing and discussing new deals. Number two are due diligences. So we work with a lot of early stage VCs as partners. And when they're actually looking, so these actual VCs, when they're looking at a live deal and, they have a certain conviction on the company, they're quite interested and they might, they're considering to invest, then we will actually put 3 or 4 of our members on that live deal, and they will work on the live deal for 2 or 3 weeks. They will write their own investment memo, will do their own research, and will provide their own perspective on that deal. And that's very valuable for the VC because they get another perspective. Maybe they find a few additional competitors or some other relevant facts. And it's very interesting for the students because they get to actually work on a live deal with experienced VCs. And so that's number 2, the due diligences. And number 3 are additional things we do internally. And that these things can change quite a lot because we always try to, improve and sharpen our offering. And currently a good example for that would be our industry sessions. So after learning the basics, each member should become an expert in a certain field. So for example, fintech, mobility, deep tech, semiconductors, medtech, what have not. We have a couple of, I think we have 7 or 8 industries at the moment that we focus on. And each of the more experienced members picks one of those. And so we pool experts in these fields together, and they have really deep discussions in their field of expertise and also build strong relationships with members from all the other hubs. But the idea is over time you become an expert in the field, and you spend a lot of time with other expert students in that field to really have deep discussions and build a deep knowledge of the field itself and the startups and investors within it.
That's super fascinating, really interesting, because I feel like that really shows you really thought this through in terms of like how VCs work, because not only the due diligence part, obviously, and then also interacting with the startups, but as you said, like having, if you look at the partner, there's always somebody who's like of health tech or whatever. So to kind of build that deep knowledge, something, I mean, I'm sure members have an incredible advantage taking away from.
Yeah, and on top of that, also occasionally VC funds come up to us and say, there's we had a metaverse deep dive, for example, I think about a year ago, and then we had a deep dive into like concrete alternatives, and this is a perfect match for our industry teams. If some VC tells us we should, or asks us to do a deep dive in a certain part of the fintech vertical, we can go to our fintech team and say, do 3 or 4 of you are interested in working with this VC, doing a deep dive with them in the space, find the relevant companies there, and figure out what part of the leading edge of technology is actually the most promising. And that's another interesting collaboration that we can do with VCs to really do a deep dive into a certain piece of technology. And because of the industry sessions, we can put members on that project who actually already have quite a lot of experience in that vertical.
Awesome, great to hear. So you talked a little bit about these internal offerings, and how much do people normally should take in terms of time commitment? Also, like, what is your typical day? Because as I understand, you're completely self-organized. So what can people expect in terms of Innovis VC?
Yeah, so in terms of the actual activities you do, it really depends on how long you have been within the organization. And like I said, we continue to, innovate and thereby optimize a lot and change the way we work also quite a bit. But, in the end, the mission remains the same, to enable highly motivated students to understand the mindset of a VC on deal selection. But the way we do things, differs quite a bit. In terms of time commitment, it's usually probably between 6 to 8 hours a week. Of course, if you're, for example, on a due diligence project, or if you're working on a deep dive, it's going to be a bit more, but that's only quite temporary. And if I had to give you a number on, how is this distributed, it's probably around 75% learning about VC, actually looking at companies, doing these due diligences, going to events, talking to founders, and the other 25% on, operational projects within Innovis, launching a new project, organizing an event, stuff like that. And as your tenure in Innovis VC increases, we have a lot of members who've been with the organization for a year or 2 years, and you're really, really motivated and really, are really a deep part of the Innovis family, then you will also get into leadership positions quite quickly. And I think we have the unique opportunity to not only become like a local hub leader, we always have 3 local hub leaders, but you also have the possibility, to get into the European board and actually shape the organization on a European level. These are once again also then 3 people on the European level. So it depends on when you join Innovis VC and what we're actually doing internally at that time, because we're very adaptive. We will always continue to optimize our offering, and also how long you've actually been part of the organization.
Awesome. So we will go now deeper actually into what you said, because European hub and the Innovis family, I feel like that sounds very interesting. So at the moment you're over 8 hubs across St. Gallen, Paris, Milan, Madrid, London, and Cambridge. I don't know if I've missed something, but I think it's super interesting in terms of like, how do you keep that going? Because I mean, having a student initiative already in one place and kind of having people engaged is not as easy, but then also expanding at the rate that you did in this short time is very impressive. So kind of how do you exchange, and kind of what is the Innovis family all about?
So in terms, maybe firstly about how we make it work, we're very clear about what our core mission is and what activities are tied to that to that clear mission. And this is essentially, replicating a VC fund in many ways. So our kind of core activities is the sourcing, the due diligence projects and stuff like that, and that we do in every hub. And through that, it's very clear what we do at the core. We have a very clear kind of also level of, let's say, quality control. We have to make sure that each hub do these core activities to be true to our offering. If they want to do additional offerings, that's totally fine. We really encourage that, but they have to make sure to stick to the core mission of the organization. And then because we started really in the beginning of COVID, the first year and a half probably of our organizational lifetime, we've been essentially remote first and distributed, and that gave us a huge advantage. Because of that, it was much easier. It was still difficult, but it was a lot easier to expand to all these different cities. And we think the international collaboration is one of our key differentiators, because you get to work with, if I'm based in Munich, I get to work with students from London, from Cambridge, from Madrid, and they really have different insights in their local ecosystem that also help me to become a better decision member. So our members themselves, they're essentially in contact with members from other hubs almost every week. This could be through the industry sessions, for example, but also through due diligences or events, or we also have kind of international project teams. When we're trying out a new format, we have a kind of like a task force that focuses on building a minimum viable product of that new offering. And then we also often have people from very, very different teams, or also different hubs.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting approach, not only the differentiation for people to expand their network in terms of like get to know students from other cities who have different lives, but also in venture capital where investors are, they normally invest in. So you're not only restricted to kind of your local experience. So that is, I feel like, very interesting. You mentioned a little bit the events. So what was your highlight last year? Like, what are the different events that people maybe can expect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most memorable event for me was the Innovis VC Hackathon. To my knowledge, it was the kind of first event of this kind in Europe. At least we haven't really seen any other big events in that setup, and I'll explain that setup a bit more, what the hackathon actually was, because maybe the conventional startup hackathon, it's usually about creating and pitching a business idea in a very short period of time. And our hackathon was actually about creating and pitching a VC fund concept in a couple of days. So to really think about, if I would raise a fund today, and if I had, for example, also a certain industry track record, how would I position my fund? In what stage would I invest in what sectors? What would help me differentiate to the other funds? Do I have a operational team that supports the startups very hands-on, or am I more a recruiting expert or stuff like that? And that was really cool, and we hadn't really seen that before in Europe. So this shows that events with Innovis VC, we're usually about doing something new, or at least making sure that the event will result in really valuable insights for most participants. And then we also enjoy just having a good time and building relationships. But we really want to try out new things and figure out what works and what is interesting. And I think that's also part of kind of the core DNA of Innovis and what we've been doing. We've always tried to be creative, build new stuff, validate it quickly, and if it works, implement it, and spend a lot of time on that. And that has worked pretty well so far.
Super fascinating. I hadn't heard of that either. That sounds very interesting proposition. Sounds like you're a little startup even yourself, like in terms of like how you think, test it, roll it out, and then otherwise iterate. So that's super nice, because then I think also for people who are applying, the kind of message that you can shape it yourself as well. I feel like that's encouraging for people to hear.
Absolutely.
So let's go a little bit into applications. So you talked about everybody being highly motivated and just kind of being united. But who would be kind of in your eyes a good fit? Like, I know it depends in terms of backgrounds, but just what would come to mind for you?
Yeah, maybe I can kind of go through the 2 or 3 points we look for in an applicant.
Yeah.
And above else, we pick people for motivation and cultural fit. So this is really the most important part in our recruiting process, is the motivation for the space and the fit to our culture. And in terms of culture, we really look for smart, kind, highly motivated, and also very empathetic students who have this deep-rooted curiosity for innovation and really want to leverage innovation kind of to, it sounds cheesy, but to build a better world driven by innovation. And that's really what we look for in terms of cultural fit and motivation. And then kind of the second part below that is relevant knowledge in the space, or relevant knowledge around technology, and also, like I said, this deep curiosity about innovation and technology. And lastly, really the third part that we hire for is then actual relevant experience in tech or consulting or startups. So maybe what's also different with Innovis, you don't need years of experience, to have a shot at membership. So most importantly, we really just look for smart and highly motivated people who want to learn about that space and shape the organization. And then it's for maybe younger people, it might sound a bit intimidating, but we also really encourage students in their first and second year to apply at Innovis and to become part of our organization, because it doesn't really matter if you don't have a strong professional background yet, as long as you bring this curiosity and this motivation and the cultural fit, you will have a great experience at Innovis, And it also, if people come in at a very early stage of their studies, it gives them a chance to really, as many have done, to be part of the Innovis journey for a year or 2 or even 3 years. And with that, really get into the higher leadership roles of the organization and really shape the entire organization. And because you spend a longer period of time in the organization, you also build these very strong relationships with these other very kind, very motivated, very smart people, and that will also help you in the long run. When you actually go out into the industry as a founder or a VC. So yeah, that's why we also encourage, and we actually like applications from younger people, because also in the end, the value we can provide to them is much higher in the end.
Yeah. I find very interesting the empathetic part, just because I feel like, especially in early stage, it's all about the team and the kind of founder. And I feel like keen knowledge on that as well, and just kind of is very important. And so I like that aspect.
Yeah, and in the end, when we're selecting people, it doesn't make sense if you hire someone who has a great background but is not a fit with the culture. And we're very proud of our culture, and in our culture, we really strive for, a highly collaborative, but also a high-performing culture with low ego, to essentially, help us learn and grow together, and to really find the offering that's the most valuable, and to continuously innovate on that, and then roll it out. And that only works if you have people who are, highly motivated, who work very efficiently or very effectively in a kind of low ego setting, to not just push your own ideas through, but to be very open for new ideas and select the best idea on a very low ego basis. And that's, I mentioned earlier, we expect around 6 to 8 hours a week in terms of commitment. If you're in the middle of exams, we're very understanding. We will, of course, then tone it down a bit, but in this kind of high performance culture, we of course also expect a certain commitment and a certain participation, because that's how the organization continues to strive and to innovate. And that's why we also, per hub, we maybe each semester we maybe take in 10, 15, and at the maximum maybe 18 or 20 people. And then, because we don't take in an unlimited amount of people, we also expect the people we actually take and who actually have a chance to be part of the Innovis family to also, you know, be involved, show their motivation for the space in the organization, and really, yeah, shape the organization in the long run.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes high performance gets a bad rep, but it's also like kind of for what you're doing it, and just kind of the purpose of it, I suppose. And then not only just to kind of say I hustled the night or something, but just like what are you doing it for? And so yeah, 100%.
And it's not just about, you know, spending the time, it's about spending the time effectively, you know.
Yeah.
And you also learn a certain I don't think work ethic is the right word, but a sort of work productivity. You know, after a couple of hours you spend with Innovis each week, you should really work on high leverage activities that are really relevant for yourself and for the organization.
Yeah, and that is something I think even like for founders are super important. Like you have so much on your plate, and for anybody really, like what is your work chiming in into which goal, and how do you do that, like you said, on the high leverage activities. Something which might be interesting for our audience, which is like, I think bachelor and master's really distributed equally. Would it be also interesting for you, for somebody who's more advanced, to apply, or would you say it is just really like more of a focus for somebody who's earlier?
Yeah, no, we're open to everyone who is kind of still a student in some ways. We actually also have quite a few PhD students, especially in our Cambridge hub. These are people who often studied, I don't know, bioinformatics or chemistry or stuff like that, and now also pivoting more or leveraging the knowledge in the business world. And for them, our offering is also really, really relevant. So we don't kind of discriminate based on your tenure in the academic system. We just want to make sure you're not like working full time. We're looking for students, and whether that's in the bachelor, the master, or the PhD, we're open to all of that. But I think, you know, if you're a PhD student and you're interested in VC, you should definitely apply. You can still learn quite a lot. But you know, if you're still very early in our studies, you have a chance to have a longer tenure within the organization, and thereby really develop and learn a lot more than if you're only doing it for the last 9 months of your studies.
100%. All right. So you talked a little bit about application, how many people you accept. So what does kind of the application process look like for somebody who is interested?
Yeah, it's very aligned. It's very aligned with what we look for in the applicant. So the application itself is, you know, basic personal information. Where do you study? A quick CV, maybe stuff like that. But then the real questions as part of the application, and I really encourage people to, you know, take a bit of time for that, is firstly about the motivation. Like I said, it's one of the most important parts, and, you know, the cultural fit. So really go into yourself, think about why do you want to learn about VC, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, or the innovation ecosystem as a whole. And the second part is about also, once again, your kind of curiosity for technology and innovation. Namely, we ask you to describe a current trend that you're excited about, so in a certain industry. And secondly, an early stage startup that is leveraging that trend. And it should really be an early stage startup. So you shouldn't say, I'm excited about process mining, and then pick Celonis as a startup. You know, it's not a startup anymore. It's a great company, but not a startup. So really make sure to read those questions carefully, and you know, take your time to answer them. And yeah, that's really the core part of the application itself. And then we go into the interview stage, and at the interview, we will have, of course, read your motivation and trend and startup. And from that, we will already have a good impression of how much of a, you know, cultural and curiosity fit you are. And in the interview, we just want to kind of confirm that and just get to know you a little bit. Maybe we'll do a small case study on a startup to just, you know, test your kind of business intuition a little bit. But we won't walk like through a huge financial plan and ask you to like calculate margins and valuations and stuff like that. That's you come to Innovis to maybe learn a little bit about that stuff. Yeah. But it's really not just confirming the feeling we got from the application itself, and really figure out, do you have a high motivation to be part of Innovis and shape the organization, and do you bring that strong curiosity for innovation and technology?
Awesome. So something which might also be interesting is that, I mean, you really described Innovis in a great way, and I think our listeners will have a good understanding, but maybe also like, what are some misconceptions? Like, is there something you hear a lot of times and you're like, no, this is not what we're about? Maybe kind of flag that as well.
Yeah, I think there are two things, maybe more, but I think there are two relevant ones. Number one is, we don't just offer a crash course. Many people just skim through the website and they see the Analyst Academy and they say, okay, they're another 8 or 10-week crash course in VC, and that's not what we are. I think there are a lot of great courses and lectures out there on VC, but and I think our academy, just to clarify, I think it's also very, very well built and covers all the relevant topics. But the real value add that we provide is this hands-on experience, to really build this strong intuition of what a great startup looks like in the early stages, and that's where we also create value for our students. And because of your longer tenure within your organization, you also build good relationships with the VCs we work with the startups, and also with the other members. And so all in all, we're not just a crash course. We're really a longer, very hands-on, very operational experience that we haven't seen in that setting before. And number two, the second second big misunderstanding is that we're not an actively investing fund. We've thought about it many times, and sooner or later, there's a good chance we will kind of launch a real VC fund or a proxy fund. But for now, we really focus on optimizing the value proposition for the students. And, we can kind of substitute having a fund we substitute that by working with strong partners on the industry side. So instead of having our own funds, we work with very strong funds in the industry, but we're not actively investing ourselves.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing that. I think that definitely brings some more clarity on it. And you talked about the offerings for students. Something which might just briefly mention as well is your offerings to both VCs and to startups. So at the beginning, you talked about the lead sharing for VCs and kind of your own platform as well. So I'm just curious, how did that come about? How has the response been, and kind of what do you hope to do with that?
Yeah, so we built it because it was a very natural addition to what we were doing. It was, in some ways, it was a very positive byproduct of what we were doing with the students. We figured out, if we're already sourcing and discussing deals, why not actually either raise a fund ourselves, which we haven't done yet, and there are a lot of reasons why we haven't. But why then not give those leads to actual partners and start working with them very closely with really strong VCs who also become mentors to the organization and to our members. So it was a very natural byproduct, and it's the same for due diligence projects, but they have a big value for the funds themselves. It's all about, if you're VC, it's all about seeing exceptional deals, and we are a very unique source of deal flow because we have probably around 200 active members all over Europe who are very deeply integrated in their local ecosystem, and they're looking for interesting startups. And this is something that is very difficult to build for VC themselves. So I think there were a couple of VCs, we've been talking to a long time, and I think who really, really got what we're doing, have an interesting description for that, or actually two. The first one is, in some ways, we're an opportunity to outsource their scout program, while also being able to work with really exceptional young talent. And that means many VCs have a scout program where they have a lot of students. I think First Momentum and Picos Capital are maybe one of the prominent examples in the DACH region, where they have a lot of students that kind of look for deals for them. And we are already a group of 200 students who have a certain education in VC, who've had quite a bit of exposure to VC, and who are looking for these interesting companies and sharing them in a very seamless approach. And the other comparison that I felt was really interesting, that I probably would have never come across and never thought of, is a comparison to, you know, self-driving cars. And in the sense that you can't do on the road, you can't really do full self-driving yet. So what you have are these, you know, tele-operated driving companies. So for example, Way or Fernride, who actually teleoperate cars. And similarly, so the comparison to us is fully data-driven sourcing currently. So with a data platform, you know, scraping linked and stuff like that. It's interesting, but it still has its gaps and drawbacks. And our approach is very complementary to it, because it's very network-based, it's very hands-on on the ground for companies who maybe don't have that much of a digital footprint yet. And we're very complementary to this data-driven sourcing, just like teleoperated driving is very complementary to you know, self-driving, or like an intermediary solution.
Really interesting. I like the analogies. They really show kind of what it's all about. Awesome. Maybe a last note on that. So you also offer startups the possibility to feedback their pitch deck. And I think that shows again that, you know, this knowledge you learn, you can really apply to different settings. So maybe, I mean, we have a lot of people who are interested in founding as well as our audience. Would it be something you could impart from what you've seen? Where do startups mostly go wrong with their pitch decks?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just one quick note on why we actually work with startups. In the end, the work with startups is often with a bit more experienced members in the organization, because for us, it's an opportunity to also kind of give them a certain board member experience. You know, maybe one, of course, not as much as an actual VC in any way, but you know, one of the tasks you could have as a board member is that your portfolio company sends you your pitch deck and says, you know, we're going to raise our new round in 2 or 3 months. Can you give us some feedback on the deck? What do you think can be improved? And maybe also what funds should we talk to? And this is in the end then valuable for our students, because they have this experience of, you know, helping founders sharpen their deck, and at the same time learning kind of how to help founders. And I think in general in decks, what is the biggest problem is that, you know, the purpose of an initial deck that you send to a VC is to create interest and not to explain your business to the last detail. So I think the biggest problem you usually see in decks is, you know, not being concise or lack of focus. And you should kind of strip as much information out of your deck as much as you can, until you only have the really bare minimum of information that gets the VC excited. Of course, you should include like some numbers, maybe 1 or 2 charts, but really keep it to the bare minimum that the VC can go through the deck in a couple of minutes. I think there is a statistic that most VCs initially on the deck spend like half a minute. So you need to make sure your deck is concise enough and focused enough to really adapt to this attention span of the VC making the decision. And this initial decision is really about, you know, creating interest and getting to this first call. And then after the first call, you know, you can send a more extended deck. But yeah, that's the key mistake that many founders do in the building the initial deck they reach out with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Max. I mean, I'm really fascinated by what you guys learned, really. I mean, I've worked in the space, and it's very interesting to see how deeply you look at this from all these perspectives and what you really offer to students. So maybe to close it off, is there something else you would like to share with our audience, some last words maybe?
Yeah, so one thing I want to emphasize that I also mentioned earlier once was that you know, we position ourselves as a venture capital student organization, and at the core we are a venture capital student organization, but our learnings are relevant for future founders and investors. So through Innovis, you really in the end learn the kind of decision process or the mindset of a VC on deal selection. And this you can leverage either as a future VC or as a future founder, you know, when you go fundraising, or if you work at an accelerator or what have not. We're not just an organization for, people who want to become VCs, but actually for a much broader kind of set of people who want to be active in the innovation ecosystem. And I think it would be a little bit sad if we miss the opportunity to work with great people just because they want to, be founders and think our offering can't help them. So I really want to make sure that people understand that we're really also a very valuable experience for founders, and also, for people who just want to get, and maybe one last aspect of that that's very helpful is within Innovis, like I said, if you show a lot of motivation and take on high ownership, you can get into these leadership positions quite quickly because of our very, lean setup. And it is also a possibility to accumulate a lot of leadership experience early on. So yeah, in the end, in summary, we're not just for VCs, we're also for, really any people who are motivated, kind, smart, and interested in the innovation ecosystem as a whole.
Thanks so much. I feel that's a great note to end on, because at the end of the day, the partnership between VCs and startups is going to be quite a strong bond, hopefully, especially if it's an early investment. So thanks so much for providing all these insights on Innovis. Thanks so much, Max.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.